Well, good morning, folks. Once again, I'm coming to you from the oil patch. Yep, I'm still down here in Midland, Texas this week. Next week, it will be a different story as I'll be coming to you from Ardmore, Oklahoma. Before we get into a recap of my activities for the past week, I want to ask all of you in the audience this question. Is it bad enough yet? By that, I mean, has the Biden administration demonstrated enough so that you understand that he and the Communist Party that he is the titular head of, has he demonstrated they truly do not believe in federalism and in the freedoms protected in our constitutional republic? Has it finally become bad enough that a vast majority of the citizens of this republic can see through the thin veneer or that facade of liberty that our central government has put on to cover up their true intentions? From the recently concluded trial in New York, where a not so impartial jury and a not so impartial judge believed the words of a madwoman and awarded a significant monetary penalty against the leading candidate for president of the United States, to the brazen actions of the child sniffer in chief along our southern border, or even to the decision handed down by the Supreme Court that somehow found that a sovereign state must submit to the unconstitutional actions of the central government. A decision that we were told had as its basis the concept of federalism. Or how about the acts of the Tennessee General Assembly, hiding their actions behind closed doors or voice votes and not allowing the citizens of the volunteer state to know exactly how their elected representatives are voting on pieces of legislation? In addition, the General Assembly is still willing to consider legislation that seeks to remove our constitutionally protected right of self defense. We'll discuss all that and more in this week's episode. With all that being said, let's get on with this week's show. But first, a quick recap of the activities over this past week. As I mentioned, I'm still down here in Midland, along with my business partners and the client. We wrapped up a week of classroom training for different levels of leadership within the organization, as well as some members of the leadership within the client's contractor organizations. All in all, it was a very successful week, and the team that I'm working with continued to hone the product we are delivering. After all, we must walk the talk, as it were, regarding continuous improvement. So we, with the input of the attendees of these facilitated courses, have made improvements to the material we are delivering, as well as in the way it is delivered. After some more classes this week, I will conduct some more engagements out in the field to coach some of the attendees in a one-on-one fashion to ensure clarity of the message and material that was delivered in the classroom environment. Sometime this coming weekend, I will make the trek over to Oklahoma to repeat the process there with the client's team members. Now that we're all up to date, let's get on with the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. The following content and message is authorized by Larry Linton, Republican candidate for the Tennessee House of Representatives, District 12. Larry Linton, Treasurer. Welcome to a show where we will discuss how the citizens of this republic must continuously fight to maintain our liberty. And those fights are increasingly against our own government. Some of the episodes on liberty will shine a light on exactly how all levels of government are seeking to erode our constitutionally protected rights. We will also discuss the leadership needed to restore our constitutional republic, as well as providing examples of good and bad people in leadership positions in all facets of our society. Additionally, we will discuss the lies the people in positions of power and influence spread every day so they can maintain those same positions. I'm your host, Larry Linton, retired U.S. Navy veteran, small business owner, and candidate for the Tennessee House of Representatives, and this is the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Good morning once again, folks. This week's episode may be more abbreviated than usual. The work and effort involved in moving forward on this latest project that I'm working on has been consuming a lot of my personal research and preparation time. So it may not end up being the usual 30 or so minutes. But I definitely want to share some thoughts and information with you all. For starters, let's kick off this segment by asking the question again, is it bad enough yet? Has the so-called federal government, all three branches of it, have they revealed to the American public just how corrupt they are and how far they have strayed away from our Constitution? And yes, it is all three branches. We can start with the legislative branch. Keep in mind, this is the branch of government that controls the purse strings of the entire central government. They control how much the entirety of the central government spends, along with how much of our sweat equity they squeeze out of every tax-paying American citizen. Referencing last week's episode when I discussed how most candidates campaign on how they are going to quote unquote help the people that elect them, just how much more help can you stand to receive on this issue from the elected members of the legislative branch of the central government? Are the unelected members that serve in the central government of Washington, D.C. helping you with your tax dollars? How about the regulatory rules put into place by those same unelected members of the cabal? Are those regulations helping or hurting you? Oh, sure, the regulatory scheme that the faceless employees put into place, along with the bills passed in the legislative branch of the central government, they do help somebody, just not you and I. The laws and regulations that you and I and every tax-paying American citizen pay for are either helping corporate interests and their lobbyists or citizens of other countries, or they are being used to prop up the corrupt regimes of those other countries. Have those facts or the legislative branch's actions become so obvious now that we have reached the point of, is it bad enough to throw them all out? Or are we as a nation going to continue to allow the apathy that has facilitated our constitutional republic to metastasize into a deadly cancer that will destroy the citizens' liberty? A cancer that has spread into and led to government control of every aspect of the legal citizens' lives. I don't know. I don't think it has quite reached that point yet. We are in an election year in our republic. And yes, I know our elections are rife with fraud and cheating, but that fraud and cheating only occurs because of voter apathy. Apathy has erased the responsibility that citizenship in a republic demands. When only roughly 50% of eligible voters participate in the electoral process every presidential election cycle, it's much lower on the off years. That leaves plenty of room for fraud and cheating to slip in. And as 2020 showed us all, vote by mail was the prime mover in this fraud. For example, in 2016, several states had negligible differences between absentee and election day voting. But in 2020, even the smallest differences were gaping chasms. For example, in Alaska, where in 2016 Trump won absentees by 15 points and election day votes by 17, absentee votes in 2020 were Biden plus 19 and election day votes were Trump plus 26. And in Georgia, where in 2016 Trump won the absentee vote by 2 points and election day votes by 6, absentees in 2020 were Biden plus 30 and election day votes were Trump plus 23. So why the stark differences? Well, it is because the communists know that election day participation by the public, us, the citizens that are required to participate in our own self-governance, the commies know that there is a huge gap between the number of eligible voters in the country and the number of eligible voters who make the effort to participate in the electoral process. And that gap, it can be filled by fraudulent mail-in ballots. Sure, maybe there was some electronic manipulation of the voting machines all over the country, but that is small potatoes when compared to the number of no excuse mail-in ballots that were used in 2020. That gap will always be used by those in power to ensure their candidate wins the election because they can count on the voters' apathy. But have the actions or inactions by the federal governments, central governments, elected members of the legislatures pushed more than 80% of eligible voters to the point of it's bad enough to replace them yet? Again, I don't think so. I think that at least half, if not more, of the people that are eligible to vote still are just waiting to or wanting to be left alone. So they don't participate in any fashion during the election seasons, no longer election day, but they just don't participate in election season at all. All of the non involvement or apathy that has allowed the legislative branch of the central government to not only erode the people's liberty with impunity for more than a century now, it has also allowed these usurpers to use our sweat equity to fund items that contribute to death and destruction around the globe. There are many examples of that to choose from, too. The biggest example would be the last scamdemic. Not only were taxpayer dollars put into the research and development of that virus that allowed the mass mail in voting that stole an election for them, the central government also used our money to provide incentives to hospitals around the country to implement protocols that killed more people than the actual virus itself. There are numerous patient advocacy groups out there with the information that clearly shows that the National Institute of Health protocols that hospitals were using on patients suffering from the virus, those protocols were killing American citizens. And the NIH, it falls under the auspices of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, which is in turn funded by, yep, we the people. So the legal citizens of this country funded the killing of people in hospitals. And those protocols are still in place, and we are still funding them. Why? Well, you know the why. Because it has not got bad enough yet, so that 80% or more of the public will not vote these people out of office. When we come back from the upcoming break, I'll discuss how our central government is also using our sweat equity to facilitate death and destruction around the globe, facilitating activity that does not advance American interests around the globe. And I will show also how it is both major political parties that are facilitating this. With that, we'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. In the previous segment, I alluded to all of them needing to be voted out. And that them refers to elected officials from both political parties. As I was talking with one of my fellow coaches here in Midland, and for a bit of background, this partner on this project hails from another country that does not have a political system with only two major political parties, but numerous ones. I was telling him, along with providing him with some examples of how our two political parties in the United States are just two sides of the same coin. A good example of that would be this. How many of you are receiving text messages right now asking for donations to both Nikki Haley and Donald Trump? I receive at least 5 or 10 of them a day. The shortened hyperlink in the text, when you touch it, takes you to a donation page for both. Now, this isn't a hit on President Trump, but how can any sane Republican that is capable of critical thinking even consider that Nikki Haley is a candidate the Republican Party should be supporting, especially supporting with their money? After witnessing the rank and file commie voters in New Hampshire openly supporting her in the GOP primary contest last week by crossover voting, which, by the way, is something our own Tennessee GOP has refused to fix. But the rank and file commies did some crossover voting for Nikki Haley against Donald Trump in that primary election. Why would the donation site for Republican candidates have her on their website? Why would a website that states that, quote, they are the official secure payments technology designed to help GOP candidates and committees win across the US, unquote? Why would they allow them to use their technology to gather donations for a candidate that is really just a redesign of Hillary Clinton? We know the why, ladies and gentlemen, don't we? As I told my colleague, is because both political parties, at least fully at the national level and partly at the state and local levels, they are just two sides of the same coin. If you were to visit the website of WinRed directly and not select the hyperlink in the text messages, you would find that WinRed is supporting 3 candidates for president of the United States. The one that does not get a lot of attention right now is Ryan Binkley. Of course, I I only found out about him while doing my research on WinRed. Why is he not getting a lot of attention is beyond me, but I digress. Another great example is exposed in this headline on a news website from just this past Friday. It is this quote, House GOP leaders eye Democrats for help on $80 billion tax bill as Republicans defect, unquote. Yes, there's even crossover voting in the U.S. House of Representatives that seek to advance the commies' desires to advance their agenda and impose their will and vision on the entire republic. If you remember, I also mentioned how the legislative branch is using our tax dollars to fund death and destruction around the world. Now, many of you may be thinking I'm referring to the never ending series of interventions or peacekeeping situations or nation building that our republic has been involved in since the end of World War II. And you'd be partly correct. The usurpers of liberty in our nation's capital have been doing those unconstitutional activities for decades now. You may also be thinking that I'm referring to the money laundering scheme that is euphemistically called foreign aid. The scheme that involves imposing confiscatory taxes on every American, or by borrowing money and putting that debt into every future generation of our citizens so that the new aristocracy in Washington, D.C. can have political power and influence in countries all over the world while we pay for it. It does not benefit we, the people. It only benefits the politicians and members of the deep or bureaucratic state that suckle at the teat of the American taxpayer. Again, you would only be partly correct. I could also be referring to the giant sucking sound that we are all hearing that represents the weapons and ammunition, along with tax dollars that nearly every elected member of Congress, along with the ice cream connoisseur, is sending to Ukraine to protect the corrupt system's biggest piggy bank. And again, you would only be partly correct. There is another component to the citizens of this great country and our unknowingly funding death and destruction. In fact, the outright slaughter of innocent men, women, and children around the globe. And that would be through the organization that is so fundamentally anti-American that I cannot believe we still fund it, but in fact, house its headquarters on American soil. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I'm referring to the United Nations. That institution that is a bastion of freedom and liberty, right? According to a recent news report, it was discovered that 12 UN employees, and for the person or the liberal commie that is going to report this portion of the podcast to big tech, because what I'm about to say hurts their feelings somehow. If these 12 people are employees of the United Nations, that means they were getting paid by the United Nations. Specifically, they were employees of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA. This agency, again, it's part of the United Nations. This agency supports the relief and humanitarian development of the Palestinian refugees. The agency's mandate encompasses Palestinians displaced by the 1948 Palestine War and subsequent conflicts, as well as their descendants, including legally adopted children. As of 2019, more than 5.6 million Palestinians are registered with UNRWA as refugees. It was established in 1949 by the UN General Assembly to provide relief to all refugees resulting from the 1948 conflict. It also provided relief to Jewish and Arab Palestine refugees inside the state of Israel following the 1948 conflict until the Israeli government took over responsibility for them in 1952. Now, as a subsidiary body of the UN, UNRWA's mandate is subject to periodic renewals every 3 years. It has consistently been extended since its founding, and most recently, it was extended until 30 June 2026. Well, believe it or not, 12 UNRWA employees took part in the attack on Israel last October. You all should remember that event, right? The attack from Gaza on Israel that is now recognized as the largest mass killing of Jewish people since the Holocaust. Yeah, that one. And it is now confirmed that UN employees took part on the side of Gaza or the Palestinians. The UN is also involved with trying to dictate how Israel can or should respond to these attacks on not only its own people, but its sovereignty. While President Trump was in office, he reduced and then eliminated U.S. taxpayer funding for that terrorist arm of the UN. If you want to find out what a person believes or what they prioritize, look at what they spend money on. In 2019 and in 2020, President Trump ended the sending of Americans' sweat equity to UNRWA. Once Sleepy Joe was installed at the White House, well, you can all guess what happened there. Funding went from $0 and right back to hundreds of millions of dollars. So, in other words, ladies and gentlemen, the central government in Washington, D.C. used our money to pay for the atrocities that occurred on October 7th, 2023. For now, though, it's time to take a break, and I'll be back with more right after this brief pause. Welcome back, and thanks for sticking with me so far, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that it is becoming clear that the federal or central government in Washington, D.C. has been paying for death and destruction not only here at home, but around the globe with our money. Again, it is our money that DC bribed hospitals with to force the protocols used during the pandemic that killed more people than the virus did. It was also our money that funded the research and development of that and apparently many more viruses. And now we're hearing about how our money paid the salaries of employees at the United Nations that participated in the October 7th, 2023 attacks. But is it bad enough yet? Probably not. It is also our tax dollars that are being spent by the central government in facilitating the invasion along the southern border. Not just in the ways I mentioned in previous weeks with NGOs and their transportation of illegal immigrants all over the country. Nope, they are directly paying federal employees to remove barriers that the individual sovereign states have put into place to stem the tide of illegal immigrants, drugs, and human trafficking. And that's happening in Texas right now. Joe Biden and his cabal of anti-American commies are not only facilitating, but actively participating with our tax dollars, don't forget, in this invasion. Remember what I said in the previous segment? If you want to find out what a person believes or what they prioritize, look at what they spend money on. The commies, which includes Joe Biden, alongside their trans-publican allies in the Congress, are spending our tax dollars facilitating and participating in this invasion all along our southern border. Oh, we cannot forget the United States Supreme Court either. They too are facilitating this invasion through their twisted logic that is denying a state their constitutional authority to defend themselves against an invasion because the central government refuses to. We pay their salaries. Once again, though, I would like to remind the audience about what I said about relying on the court system or the judicial branch to save us. How can it when they plainly ignore the Constitution? Wow, I've spent a lot of time this week breaking down the central government's role in the erosion of our liberty. Doesn't leave me a lot of time to talk about how the Tennessee General Assembly is doing the same thing here to the people of the volunteer state. I have a few minutes left in this segment where I can provide you with some examples of how they're doing it, but more importantly, how you can stop them from eroding our liberty. First, though, we'll start with some great information that the Tennessee Firearms Association has put together for everybody to read. In a recent message from the TFA, they reported that since the beginning of this year, and we're not even through the first month of the year 2024, folks, at least 79 bills have either been introduced in the Tennessee legislature or there are bills that were filed in 2023 which have some type of activity. Some of these bills do appear to be appropriately based upon the Bruin decision made by the United States Supreme Court. Keep in mind, though, that although some of them passed the Bruin test, many of these bills, including a few of the ones filed by communists and then some trans-publicans, clearly violate the Bruin mandate. Further, while some of these bills obviously satisfy the Bruin basis standard, many, if not most, make no effort to address the Supreme Court's mandate in their decision. I would like to remind the audience that what Bruin basis or Bruin test is. is a requirement that government must demonstrate that laws on the books, along with proposed changes to laws already passed, must satisfy the constitutional test that those restrictions or limitations on the right of the people to keep and bear arms must be consistent with those that were in place and in use in 1791, the year in which the Second Amendment was ratified and added to the Constitution. In addition to the report put out by the Tennessee Firearms Association, which is more than 80 pages long, the report on the bills that have been filed or have activity in 2024 is available on their website. They are also including a report on the bills that had the contact information for the members of the General Assembly involved in handling that same pieces of legislation. These are scheduled to be heard this week. I'm strongly encouraging my fellow Tennesseans to check out the report, which can be found at TennesseeFirearms.com. Again, head over to TennesseeFirearms.com and look at the report. More importantly, contact the members of the General Assembly and urge them to follow their oaths to the Constitution. Because what happened at the start of the regular session this year, folks, with the Republican caucus refusing to impose transparency on themselves with a rule change, has made it completely clear that it will take active and persistent involvement from these legislators' constituents to get them to follow their oaths. There are some pieces of legislation being considered right now that need the help of every Tennessean. One of the bills that is up for consideration is House Bill 1247, which was introduced by Representative Dennis Powers. In fact, Representative Powers introduced this bill last year, but it got shelved for some quote unquote mysterious reason. Now, anytime a bill is shelved or killed for a mysterious reason, know that the mysterious reason is money, specifically our money versus corporate or lobbyist money. And they always win because they have more of it. Anyway, the bill has, as introduced, would prohibit an illegal immigrant from being housed on real property owned by the state or a political subdivision of the state. It has exemptions for being incarcerated or other housing as required as a result of a criminal conviction. This bill is just one of the many ways we can turn off the magnet that is drawing illegal immigrants to our state. Senator Nicely, one of my favorite senators, he is the sponsor of the Senate companion bill, which is SB 1151. But since it was delayed in the House last year, the House committee considering it really needs to hear from Tennesseans so they can pass this bill. The state government committee has this bill on their calendar for the 31st. So between now and the close of business sometime tomorrow, Central Time tomorrow, call or email all the members of that committee and urge them to pass this bill out of committee and don't do their typical dirty tricks and kill good pieces of legislation with a voice vote. To get the email addresses and phone numbers for the representatives, visit the website of www.capitol.tn.gov. Again, that is www.capitol.tn.gov. And that is capital with a TOL, not a TAL. On that website, you can find the contact information for every committee and look at the schedule for the bills they will be considering. It is way past time to get involved. If they won't be transparent in how they vote, we need to make it known to them that we are watching. Well, that is all the time I have for this week, folks. Before I break for the closing segment, I would like the voters here in Sevier County, specifically House District 12, know this about me. If you elect me and send me to Nashville, I will work my hardest to ensure that the machinations of the General Assembly become as transparent as possible. I will continue to use this platform, among many others, to share with the people of Tennessee exactly what is happening behind closed doors there in Nashville. I will not be beholden to a political party, its donors, nor any other special interest group beyond the one that I'm responsible to. You, the residents of District 12. With that, I'm going to take a quick break before I come back with closing out the show with God's Word. We'll be right back. All right, folks. let's wrap up this week with some encouragement as well as wisdom from God's word. The encouragement comes from what I previously viewed as an unlikely source. Maybe the timing, which I'll talk about in a minute, maybe the timing is right. Maybe this elected official has finally realized that it has become bad enough and the persistent liberty eroding unconstitutional actions of the central government have gone too far and for too long now. Governor Abbott of Texas has finally said enough is enough. Maybe he's taking a clue from a former president of Tennessee. Well, for 2 years, when President Andrew Jackson famously defied the Supreme Court over one of their decisions and announced, quote, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it, unquote. Governor Abbott is also defying, in a way, the unconstitutional decision made by the Supreme Court last week. He is openly calling for the usurper in chief, Biden, to enforce that decision. I am encouraged by the other governors around the nation rallying to Abbott's side, even more so when they are rallying with troops and money and other actions instead of just words. The great state of Tennessee, we have a long connection with Texas in the fight for liberty and freedom, going all the way back to 1836 and Texas's war from independence from Mexico and the Battle of the Alamo. Tennessee's very own Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier, fought and died alongside Texans at the Alamo. He was among 36 or so other Tennesseans, the largest contribution of men among the various states of the USA at the time. But that wasn't Davy Crockett's only claim to fame. He also served as a representative from Tennessee in the U.S. House of Representatives. I would ask the listeners to this program to search the internet for stories about Congressman Crockett's famous speech in the House where he served. The speech is titled, Not Yours to Give. If only more members of the House of Representatives truly understand what he said in that speech. Anyway, I'm very pleased with the amount of support that governors around the nation are providing Texas in this showdown that is centered on federalism and the proper vertical separation of powers as laid out in our Constitution. What concerns me about this support is that many will only offer their support via strongly worded letters and leave it at that. Will all of these governors stay the course and ensure a revival of federalism takes place? Or will they slink away and cower once the central government starts taking away the bribe money of federal grants and federal funding? We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. If the latter happens, federalism and the vertical separation of powers in our constitutional republic, it is truly dead, with little hope outside of brass and blood to resurrect it, folks. But I will remain encouraged until that comes to pass. This week's scripture comes to us from Romans chapter 8, verses 28 and 29. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. For God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to be like his son, so that his son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that things are looking bad right now for our constitutional republic. And I asked the question at the start of this week's show, as well as throughout it, is it bad enough yet? Have we hit rock bottom yet where we will all be led blindly to the slaughter, the complete destruction of our liberty? Our Creator provides us with trials to strengthen our faith at the right time. This current time in our republic seems to be one of those trials. Let's not be found lacking. We can stand together as brothers and sisters and put in the work necessary to restore our country back to its founding principles. Let's answer our Creator's call to fulfill his purpose. Until next week, I humbly pray and ask that you stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.